June 4, 1942.
10:20 Uhr morgens.
20,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, 200 miles northwest of Midway Atoll. Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky grips the stick of his Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber, eyes straining against the glare reflecting off the endless blue below. His fuel gauge needle hovers near empty. Sweat soaks through his khaki flight suit despite the bitter cold at altitude. Behind him, 32 more Dauntless from USS Enterprise strain their engines, burning fuel they don't have, searching for an enemy that should be here but isn't. They should have found them by now. 2 hours earlier, McClusky had led his squadron off Enterprise's pitching deck into the pre-dawn darkness, part of a massive strike force hunting for the Japanese carrier fleet that had already attacked Midway Island. The intelligence said the Japanese would be here for fleet carriers, the same carriers that had destroyed the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor 6 months ago. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. The most powerful concentration of naval aviation ever assembled. But the ocean below reveals nothing. Just endless whitecaps and empty blue. McClusky's wingman, Lieutenant Dick Best, maintains position off his right wing. Behind them, the formations of Scouting Squadron 6 and Bombing Squadron 6 follow their leader, though several pilots have already radioed that they're approaching the point of no return. Past that invisible line in the sky, they won't have enough fuel to make it back to Enterprise. They'll have to ditch in the ocean and hope the destroyers find them before the sharks do or exposure kills them. The morning had started with chaos. Enterprise and Hornet launched their strikes before dawn, aiming for where the Japanese carriers should have been based on the last sighting report. But Admiral Nagumo had changed course. The American torpedo squadrons found them first and died for it. Hornet's Torpedo Squadron 8, 15 Douglas TBD Devastators, pressed their attacks at wave-top height, lumbering and slow, perfect targets for the Japanese Zeros. All 15 were shot down. Not a single torpedo hit. Enterprise's Torpedo Squadron 6 met the same fate. Then Yorktown's torpedo bombers. 41 torpedo planes launched that morning. 35 shot down. The few survivors limped away with shattered aircraft and dead crew members slumped in their seats. But McClusky didn't know that yet. Flying at 20,000 feet, he couldn't see the slaughter happening at sea level. All he knew was that his fuel was running out and he hadn't found the enemy. At 10:05, he'd reached the expected intercept point. Nothing. Empty ocean. He made the decision that would change history. Instead of turning back, he would continue the search. He turned his formation northeast, following the geometric logic of where a carrier task force might be if it had changed course. His pilots are burning fuel they need to get home. Some are already calculating whether they can make it back. In the rear cockpit of each Dauntless, radio operators and gunners scan the horizon, looking for the telltale white wakes of a fleet at speed. Then, at 10:20, Ensign Bill Pittman spots it. A lone Japanese destroyer, cutting a white wake far below, heading northeast at flank speed. McClusky sees it seconds later. A destroyer racing to rejoin its fleet. McClusky doesn't hesitate. He wings over and follows the destroyer's wake like an arrow pointing to its target. 6 minutes later, they see them. 4 white arrowheads scratched into the dark blue of the Pacific, converging toward a single point. McClusky's breath catches. He keys his radio. Enemy carriers, dead ahead. There they are. 4 flat tops in formation, grey steel islands surrounded by their escort ships. From 20,000 feet, they look like toy ships on a blue carpet. But McClusky knows better. Those are the most powerful warships afloat. Each carrier holds 70 aircraft. Each flight deck can launch a strike that could obliterate a city. But something is wrong with the picture below. The carriers' decks are crowded with aircraft. McClusky can see them even from 4 miles up, dark shapes clustered on the flight decks. The carriers should be launching fighters to intercept his bombers, should be turning into the wind, should be clearing their decks. But they are not. The planes are just sitting there, clustered together. McClusky doesn't know it yet, but he's arrived at the perfect moment. The Japanese carriers have just recovered their Midway attack force. Their decks are packed with aircraft being rearmed and refueled for a strike against the American carriers. Fuel hoses snake across the decks. Bombs and torpedoes sit on carts, waiting to be loaded. The hangars below decks are crammed with armed and fueled aircraft. Admiral Nagumo had been caught in an impossible dilemma that morning. When his scouts finally spotted the American carriers, his planes were already armed for a second strike on Midway. He ordered them rearmed with ship-killing torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs. Then his returning Midway strike force needed to land. He had to clear the decks, bring them aboard. He'd rearm and refuel everything, then launch one massive strike that would destroy the American carriers. It made perfect tactical sense. But it took time. Wade McClusky has arrived in the middle of that rearming. The Japanese carriers are at their most vulnerable, decks packed with armed and fueled aircraft, fuel lines open, bombs and torpedoes scattered across the hangar decks. But McClusky faces his own problem. He has 2 squadrons of dive bombers, 33 aircraft total. But he can only see 2 carriers clearly in his formation's attack path, Akagi and Kaga. The other 2 carriers, Soryu and Hiryu, are several miles away, partially obscured by clouds. He makes a snap decision. He'll take his squadron, Scouting 6, against the nearer carrier Kaga. He radios Lieutenant Best, leading Bombing 6, take the carrier on the left. But the radio crackles with static. Best doesn't hear him clearly. The message is garbled. McClusky doesn't know if Best heard him. There's no time to confirm. The Japanese have spotted them now. Far below, he can see the carriers beginning to turn, beginning to react. In seconds, Zero fighters will be clawing for altitude. Anti-aircraft fire will fill the sky. He signals with his hand, pointing down at his target. Then he pushes his stick forward. The Dauntless noses over into the dive. The altimeter unwinds. 20,000 feet. 18,000. 15,000. The carrier grows larger in his bomb sight, resolving from a grey rectangle into a steel ship bristling with guns. Wind screams past the canopy at 250 knots. McClusky's dive brakes keep the aircraft stable as gravity pulls him toward the target. Behind him, 32 more Dauntless follow him down. They form a deadly stream, one bomber after another, each pilot centering his target in the bomb sight, waiting for the right altitude, the right angle, the right moment to pull the release. Lieutenant Dick Best, leading Bombing Squadron 6, sees McClusky's squadron diving on Kaga. He realizes instantly what happened. McClusky intended for Bombing 6 to hit a different carrier, but now both squadrons are attacking the same target. It's a tactical disaster. They're about to waste 33 1,000-pound bombs on a single carrier while 3 others escape untouched. Best makes a decision in a fraction of a second. He breaks off from the dive, his wingmen following him. 3 planes just 3 peel away from the formation and search for a different target. Best spots Akagi, the Japanese flagship, 2 miles away. Admiral Nagumo's carrier, the pride of the combined fleet. He wings over and dives alone, just him and his 2 wingmen, against the most important ship in the Japanese Navy. On Kaga's deck, Japanese sailors look up and see the sky filled with dark shapes plunging toward them like stooping hawks. The anti-aircraft guns open up, filling the air with black puffs of flak. Tracers arc upward. But the dive bombers keep coming. McClusky centers Kaga's flight deck in his sight. The image of the carrier deck fills his view. He can see individual aircraft now, can see men running, can see the rising sun painted near the bow. At 2,500 feet, he pulls the release lever. The 1,000-pound bomb drops free. The Dauntless lurches upward, suddenly 1,000 pounds lighter. McClusky hauls back on the stick, pulling 6 GS, vision tunneling to grey as blood drains from his head. The nose comes up. His level at 500 feet, racing away at full throttle. Behind him, one after another, his pilots make their drops and pull out. 33 1,000-pound bombs fall toward Kaga's crowded deck. McClusky doesn't see his bomb hit. He's too busy flying, too busy escaping the curtain of anti-aircraft fire. But 4 seconds after he pulls out, a massive explosion erupts from Kaga's deck. The first bomb strikes Kaga amidships, punching through the wooden flight deck and detonating in the hangar below. The explosion rips upward, sending a geyser of flame and debris 500 feet into the air. Aircraft on the flight deck cartwheel across the steel planking, fuel tanks rupturing, igniting instantly. The second bomb hits 3 seconds later, forward of the island. Then a third. Then a fourth. 1,000-pound bombs slam into Kaga in less than 10 seconds. Each one detonates among the armed and fueled aircraft packed on her decks. The Japanese Type 97 Kate torpedo bombers, each carrying a 1,760-pound aerial torpedo, explode in chain reactions. Torpedoes cook off. Aviation fuel ignites in rolling fireballs. Bombs stacked on carts detonate sympathetically, each explosion triggering the next. Within 30 seconds, Kaga's entire flight deck is a sea of flame. In the carrier's island, Captain Jisaku Okada feels the deck heave beneath his feet with each hit. Fire alarms scream throughout the ship. Damage reports flood the bridge fires in the hangar deck, fires on the flight deck, the forward elevator blown completely off its mountings and thrown into the ocean. His damage control parties rush toward the flames, but the heat drives them back. The fire suppression systems were designed to fight ordinary fires, not this inferno of aviation fuel and high explosives. Men trapped on the forward section of the flight deck try to escape aft, but flames block their path. Some jump overboard, plunging 60 feet into the Pacific. Others are simply consumed where they stand. Okada knows his ship is dying. 4 bomb hits in 10 seconds. The Americans couldn't have timed it better if they'd planned it. His carrier, which could have launched another strike in an hour, is now a floating funeral pyre. But Kaga isn't alone. 2 miles away, Lieutenant Dick Best has completed his dive on Akagi. His wingmen released First Ensigns Weber and Kroger, diving from opposite sides, bracketing the flagship. Best watched Weber's bomb miss astern, saw Kroger splash just short of the bow. Misses. Both of them. Now it's Best's turn. He's alone in his dive, the only aircraft attacking the most important carrier in the Japanese fleet. Every gun on Akagi and her escorts fires at him. The sky around his Dauntless fills with black puffs and streaming tracers. A shell fragment clangs off his engine cowling. His radio operator, aviation radioman James Murray, fires back with a rear-mounted .30 caliber machine gun, a futile gesture against the wall of steel flying at them. Best centers the bomb sight on Akagi's flight deck. He can see Admiral Nagumo's flag flying from the island. He can see aircraft spotted for launch, can see the rising sun insignia painted on the deck. At 2,000 feet, he releases. The bomb falls away. Best pulls out hard, the G-forces crushing him into his seat. His vision tunnels. The Dauntless shudders as it bottoms out at 500 feet and roars away at full throttle. Behind him, his 1,000-pound bomb falling at over 250 miles per hour strikes Akagi's flight deck just after the midships elevator. The bomb punches through the wooden deck planking and the thin steel beneath it. It penetrates into the hangar deck before its fuse triggers detonation. The explosion occurs in the worst possible place directly among the aircraft being rearmed. The hangar deck is crammed with Kate torpedo bombers and Val dive bombers. Fuel hoses are connected to several aircraft, pumping high-octane aviation gasoline. Torpedoes sit on carts, waiting to be loaded. Mechanics work frantically, rushing to prepare the strike that will destroy the American carriers. Best's bomb detonates in the center of this organized chaos. The explosion is catastrophic. The blast wave rips through the hangars, tearing aircraft apart, igniting fuel, detonating ordnance. A Kate bomber, fully fueled with its torpedo already loaded, explodes like a bomb itself. The torpedo's warhead adds its 450 pounds of high explosive to the conflagration. Other aircraft catch fire instantly. Within seconds, the entire hangar deck is engulfed. But the worst is yet to come. The explosion ruptures fuel lines running through the hangar. Aviation gasoline sprays across hot metal and open flames. It vaporizes instantly, creating a fuel-air mixture that detonates with the force of a secondary bomb. The overpressure blows out the hangar deck sides, sending jets of flame shooting out of Akagi's hull. On the bridge, Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, the man who commanded the attack on Pearl Harbor, staggers as his flagship heaves beneath him. Black smoke boils up from the hangar deck. His flight deck officer reports fires out of control. His damage control officer reports the fire mains have been cut. His communications officer reports the radio antenna has been destroyed. Captain Taihiro Aoki, Akagi's commanding officer, knows immediately that his ship is finished. One bomb. Just one 1,000-pound bomb, placed with perfect precision at the perfect moment. If the bomb had hit 10 minutes earlier, before the aircraft were fueled and armed, they might have controlled the fires. If it had hit an hour later, after the strike had been launched, the hangar deck would have been empty. But it hit at exactly the moment when Akagi was at her most vulnerable decks and hangars packed with fueled, armed aircraft ready to launch. The secondary explosions begin almost immediately. Bombs cook off in the heat. More torpedoes detonate. Each explosion feeds the fire, and the fire triggers more explosions. It's a chain reaction that can't be stopped. Nagumo's staff officers beg him to transfer his flag to a cruiser. The Admiral refuses, standing on the bridge of his dying flagship, watching the smoke and flame consume his carrier. The time is 10:26 a.m. 6 minutes since McClusky spotted the Japanese carriers. But the Americans aren't finished. At that exact moment 10:26 am Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie is leading Yorktown's bombing squadron 3 down through 15,000 feet toward a third carrier. Leslie doesn't know about McClusky's attack or Best's attack. Yorktown launched her strike from a different position, following a different bearing. It's pure coincidence that all 3 American dive bomber squadrons have arrived at the same moment. But what a coincidence. Leslie's target is Soryu, the third carrier in the Japanese formation. 17 Dauntless follow him down. They face the same curtain of anti-aircraft fire that greeted Enterprise's bombers, but they dive through it with the same grim determination. Leslie's bomb release mechanism malfunctions. His 1,000-pound bomb drops away prematurely, falling harmlessly into the ocean. It's a cruel twist of fate. The squadron commander's bomb is wasted. But his pilots press their attacks. Ensign Paul Holmberg centers Soryu in his sight. He can see the carrier turning hard, trying to comb the attack, but at 250 knots in a 70-degree dive, the American bombers can adjust their aim faster than the carrier can turn. Holmberg releases at 2,500 feet and pulls out. His bomb strikes Soryu's flight deck forward, near the number 1 elevator. The explosion blows the elevator platform 50 feet into the air. It comes crashing back down, twisted and useless. 3 seconds later, Lieutenant Harold Bottomley's bomb hits amidships. The explosion detonates directly among the aircraft spotted for launch. A Val dive bomber explodes, its 550-pound bomb adding to the destruction. Then a third hit, aft near the island. 3 bombs in 5 seconds. Just like Kaga. Just like Akagi. Soryu's captain Ryusuke Yonajimoto feels his ship shudder with each impact. Fire erupts across the flight deck. In the hangar below, the same deadly pattern repeats. Armed aircraft, open fuel lines, stacked ordnance, all ignited by American bombs placed with deadly precision. The explosions tear through Soryu's vitals. Her fire mains rupture. Her communication systems fail. Flames spread faster than the damage control parties can react. Men fight the fires with desperate courage, but it's hopeless. The fires have too much fuel, literally tons of aviation gasoline and hundreds of bombs and torpedoes waiting to explode. On Kaga, the fires have spread throughout the ship. Captain Okada orders abandon ship at 10:40 am, just 14 minutes after the first bomb hit. His crew begins lowering boats and throwing life rafts into the water. The carrier lists to port as seawater floods through ruptured hull plates. Men slide down ropes into the ocean. Others jump, falling the height of a 6-story building into the Pacific. Admiral Nagumo finally agrees to transfer off Akagi at 10:46 am. His staff officers physically pull him from the bridge as flames engulf the island. They descend ladders to the flight deck, crossing a steel deck so hot it burns through their shoes. A destroyer pulls alongside, and Nagumo and his staff jump across the narrow gap between ships. As the destroyer pulls away, Nagumo turns to watch his flagship burn. Akagi is blazing from stem to stern. Explosions continue to ripple through her hull as more ordnance cooks off in the heat. The carrier that led the attack on Pearl Harbor, that had projected Japanese power across the Pacific for 6 months, is dying in front of him. On Soryu, Captain Yonajimoto refuses to abandon ship. His officers beg him to leave, but he stands on the bridge, sword in hand, going down with his command. Around him, his crew evacuates. By 10:45 am, over 700 men are in the water, swimming away from the burning carrier. 3 carriers. 3 of Japan's 6 fleet carriers, fatally damaged and burning. 400 aircraft destroyed, either blown apart by American bombs or consumed by the fires raging through the ships. 700 trained aircrew killed or about to die, pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners, mechanics. Men who had trained for years, who had led the attack on Pearl Harbor, who had swept through the Pacific with seemingly unstoppable force. All destroyed in 6 minutes. From 10:22 a.m., when the first bomb hit Kaga, to 10:28 a.m., when the last bomb hit Soryu, 6 minutes that changed the course of the Pacific War. But one Japanese carrier remains untouched. Hiryu, operating several miles away from the other 3 carriers, escaped the American dive bomber attacks. Her deck is clear. Her aircraft are ready. Her captain is preparing a counterstrike. The battle isn't over yet. Aboard USS Enterprise, 175 miles southeast of the burning Japanese carriers, Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance stands on the flag bridge, binoculars pressed to his eyes, searching the northern horizon. He can't see the battlelets too far away, beyond the curvature of the Earth, but his radio operators are intercepting transmissions, fragmentary reports from his returning pilots. Lieutenant Commander McClusky's voice crackles through the radio speakers, 3 carriers hit and burning. Spruance lowers his binoculars. He's a calm man, famously unflappable, a cruiser admiral thrust into carrier command only 3 days ago when Admiral Halsey fell ill with a skin disease. Spruance doesn't show emotion easily, but his operations officer, Captain Miles Browning, sees something change in the admiral's expression. 3 carriers, Spruance says quietly. Not a question. A statement. He's processing the implications. The operations staff waits. On the plot table, 3 red counters representing Japanese carriers are marked with black XS. Intelligence said Japan brought 4 carriers to Midway. 3 are burning. That leaves 1. But Spruance isn't thinking about the 4th carrier yet. He's thinking about what those 3 burning carriers mean strategically. He's one of the Navy's finest tactical minds, a student of naval history and logistics, a man who thinks in terms of shipyards and training pipelines and industrial capacity. He turns to his Chief of Staff, Captain William Buraka. The Japanese can't replace those air groups, he says. Not in time. Not quickly enough to matter. Buraka nods slowly, understanding dawning. It's not just the carriers themselves. Steel and machinery can be replaced, given time. It's the aircrew. The pilots, bombardiers, radio operators, and gunners now dying on those 3 burning ships represent years of training. Japan's carrier aviation program was small, elite, selective. They trained their pilots to an extraordinary standard, but they trained relatively few of them. Spruance has read the intelligence estimates. Japan had perhaps 1,500 trained carrier aviators before the war began. They lost some at Pearl Harbor, more in the Indian Ocean raids, more in the Coral Sea. The 3 burning carriers held roughly 250 aircrew. But it's not just those 250 men. It's also the training cadre they represent, the experienced pilots who would have trained the next generation. You can't create a carrier pilot in weeks or months. It takes years. And Spruance knows that Japan doesn't have years. They'll have carriers, Spruance says, thinking aloud. Zuikaku and Shokaku will be repaired. They'll finish building new ones. But filling the flight decks with trained pilots. He shakes his head. They've lost the seed corn. It's 11:15 a.m. Spruance has been in command of Task Force 16 for less than 72 hours. But in that moment, standing on Enterprise's flag bridge, he understands that the Pacific War has fundamentally changed. Japan has lost the strategic initiative. They'll still fight probably for years, but they'll be fighting defensively, reacting to American moves, unable to mount the kind of offensive operations that had characterized the first 6 months of the war. But the battle isn't over. Somewhere to the north, a 4th Japanese carrier is still operational. And that carrier will try to strike back. Spruance's thoughts are interrupted by a lookout shout, "Aircraft inbound, bearing 350. Enterprise's flight deck erupts in controlled chaos. Fighters scramble. Gun crews race to their stations. The carrier turns into the wind, maximizing speed, preparing to launch every available fighter. But the incoming Japanese strike isn't targeting Enterprise. 30 miles to the northeast, USS Yorktown picks up the same radar contact. 18 Japanese aircraft Val dive bombers from Hiryu are inbound. Aboard Yorktown, Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, the overall task force commander, watches his fighter director plot the incoming raid. His carrier had already been damaged at Coral Sea a month ago, hastily repaired at Pearl Harbor in just 3 days, then sent back into action. Now she's about to be hit again. Yorktown's Combat Air Patrol intercepts the Japanese strike at 12:10 p.m. F-4F Wildcats tear into the Val formation, shooting down several bombers before they can begin their dives. But the Japanese pilots are among the best in the world, elite crews from Hiryu's veteran air group. They push through the fighters, through the curtain of anti-aircraft fire, and begin their attacks. The first bomb hits Yorktown's flight deck at 12:12 p.m., penetrating to the third deck before exploding. The blast kills or injures dozens of men and starts fires in the rag storage compartment. Damage control parties respond immediately, fighting the flames with practiced efficiency. 17 seconds later, a second bomb strikes amidships, blowing a massive hole in the flight deck and starting more fires. This one knocks out 5 of Yorktown's 9 boilers. The carrier's speed drops from 30 knots to 6 knots in seconds. A third bomb hits near the island, destroying the number 1 elevator and starting yet another fire. Black smoke pours from Yorktown's wounds. She's dead in the water, listing to port, burning. But Yorktown doesn't die easily. Her crew fights back with desperate skill. Damage control parties flood magazines to prevent catastrophic explosions. They shore up bulkheads, pump out flooded compartments, fight fires. By 12:40 p.m., just 28 minutes after the attack, they have the fires under control and 3 boilers back online. Yorktown is making 18 knots, her list corrected. Against all odds, she might survive. Fletcher knows he can't command the task force from a damaged carrier with limited communications. He transfers his flag to the cruiser Astoria, turning tactical command over to Spruance. As Fletcher's boat pulls away from Yorktown, he looks back at his battered carrier, still making headway, still fighting. Spruance now commands both carrier task forces. 2 carriers, Enterprise and Hornet, plus their escorts. Against 1 Japanese carrier. The math favors him, but Hiryu is still dangerous. At 1:30 p.m., Yorktown's radar picks up a second strike, this time torpedo bombers. Hiryu has launched everything she has left. 10 Kate torpedo bombers and 6 Zero fighters. They've come to finish what the dive bombers started. The Kates bore in at wave-top height, impossibly brave, flying through a storm of anti-aircraft fire. Yorktown's escorts throw up a wall of steel, but the Japanese press their attacks with samurai determination. 4 Kates are shot down before they can launch their torpedoes. The remaining 6 split up, attacking from both sides. The Anvil maneuver, designed to guarantee hits no matter which way the carrier turns. If Yorktown turns toward the port side attack, she'll expose her beam to the starboard attack, and vice versa. Captain Elliot Buckmaster spins the wheel hard, trying to comb the torpedoes' turn parallel to their path so they'll miss a head or a stern. But with attacks from both sides, it's impossible. At 2:43 p.m., 2 torpedoes slam into Yorktown's port side. The explosions are catastrophic. The first torpedo blows a hole 30 feet across in the carrier's hull. The second torpedo ruptures the port fuel tanks and knocks out the remaining boilers. Yorktown loses all power. Her list increases to 26 degrees. Water floods the lower decks. Men trapped below climb vertical ladders that are now nearly horizontal, fighting their way toward daylight. By 3 p.m., Buckmaster gives the order to abandon ship. His crew begins going over the side, sliding down ropes, jumping into the Pacific. Destroyers pull alongside to pick up survivors. Yorktown floats dead in the water, listing heavily, but she still won't sink. The carrier is tough, built to absorb punishment. But Hiryu's victory is hollow. While her pilots were attacking Yorktown, American search planes finally found her. At 2:45 p.m., the same moment Yorktown was taking torpedoes, a scout plane from Yorktown radioed Hiryu's position. Enterprise immediately launched a strike, 24 Dauntless from Enterprise plus 16 from Hornet. 40 aircraft hunting for the last Japanese carrier. Spruance stands on Enterprise's flag bridge, watching his strike depart. He knows what finding Hiryu means. He knows that if his pilots can destroy this last carrier, Japan's offensive capability in the Pacific will be effectively eliminated. 4 fleet carriers sunk in a single day. It would be the greatest naval victory in American history. At 5 p.m., the American dive bombers find Hiryu. She's steaming northeast at high speed, trying to escape, but there's nowhere to go. The Pacific Ocean offers no hiding places. Lieutenant Earl Gallagher leads the attack. His Dauntless push over into their dives from 18,000 feet. The same sequence repeats: screaming dives, anti-aircraft fire, bombs falling toward flight deck. The first bomb hits Hiryu's flight deck forward. The second strikes amidships. The third hits aft. 4 hits total in the first attack wave. Then Hornets bombers follow, adding 3 more bomb hits. 7 bombs in 10 minutes. Hiryu's flight deck erupts in the same deadly pattern: fuel, ordnance, and aircraft detonating in sympathetic explosions. Within minutes, the carrier is a blazing wreck, her flight deck warped and twisted by the heat, her hangars filled with fire. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, commanding Hiryu, watches his carrier burn. He knows what this means. 4 carriers lost. The entire Kido Butai, the First Air Fleet, the most powerful naval strike force ever assembled, destroyed in a single day. He sends a final message to Admiral Yamamoto, commanding the combined fleet from his flagship battleship hundreds of miles away. 4 carriers burned. Unable to continue operations. Yamamoto receives the message at 7:15 p.m. He's been monitoring the battle all day, receiving fragmentary reports, watching his carefully planned operation disintegrate. The Midway invasion was supposed to lure the American carriers into a trap. Instead, the Americans have destroyed his carrier force. Yamamoto orders the withdrawal. The entire invasion fleet transports, battleships, cruisers, destroyers turns west, abandoning the Midway operation. Without air cover, without carrier support, they can't proceed. American land-based bombers from Midway would tear them apart. Back aboard Enterprise, Spruance receives the scout reports confirming Hiryu is burning and dead in the water. He turns to his staff. 4 carriers, he says. All 4 burning. His operations officer begins planning a night surface action to pursue the withdrawing Japanese fleet with battleships and cruisers. But Spruance shakes his head. No. We've won. We don't need to risk what we've gained by charging into their battleship force in the dark. It's a controversial decision. Some of his officers want to pursue, to destroy more enemy ships. But Spruance is thinking strategically, not tactically. He's won the battle. He's destroyed Japan's carrier strike force. Risking his carriers in a night action against superior enemy surface forces would be foolish. The enemy is retreating. Let them go. As the sun sets on June 4, 1942, Spruance stands on the darkened bridge, watching the stars emerge overhead. Somewhere to the north, 4 Japanese carriers are burning. Tomorrow, they'll sink beneath the waves. With them will go Japan's offensive power in the Pacific. Spruance understands, even if no one else does yet, that the war has turned. June 5, 1942.
4:58 nachts.
The Pacific Ocean, 250 miles northwest of Midway. Kaga slips beneath the waves first, taking 800 men with her. The carrier that had launched aircraft against Pearl Harbor, that had dominated the Pacific for 6 months, disappears in a hiss of steam and a rush of displaced water. Her bow tilts up as her stern floods, then she slides backward into 17,000 feet of water. Men still aboard, the ones who stayed to fight fires, the ones who couldn't escape, ride her down into darkness. At 7:15 a.m., Soryu follows. Captain Yanagimoto, still on the bridge, sword in hand, goes down with his ship. His final words, shouted to officers who tried one last time to convince him to abandon ship: "I am staying. Go save yourselves." The carrier rolls to port, capsizes, and sinks. 718 men die with her. Akagi burns all day and into the night, refusing to die. Admiral Nagumo, now aboard the cruiser Nagara, watches his former flagship through binoculars, seeing explosions still rippling through her hull as ammunition continues to cook off in the inferno. At 2 a.m. on June 5, Japanese destroyers finally put torpedoes into Akagi's hull, a mercy killing. The flagship settles by the stern and vanishes beneath the waves. 267 men are lost. Hiryu survives longer than the others, burning through the night of June 4th. Her crew fights desperately to save her, but the fires can't be contained. At dawn on June 5th, Admiral Yamaguchi orders the crew to abandon ship. Then he and Captain Tomio Koku retire to Yamaguchi's cabin, where they commit ritual suicide rather than survive the loss of their ship. At 9 a.m., Japanese destroyers torpedo Hiryu. She sinks with 416 men still aboard, taking Yamaguchi and Koku to the bottom. 4 fleet carriers. Gone in 24 hours. Along with them, approximately 2,200 officers and men, but more importantly, 248 trained carrier aviators. Pilots who had trained for 5 years, who had flown combat missions since Pearl Harbor, who represented the elite of Japanese naval aviation. Those 248 men are the ones that Spruance understood couldn't be replaced. In Tokyo, the Naval General Staff receives the casualty reports with mounting horror. 4 carriers lost. But as the detailed assessments arrive, they realize the true magnitude of the disaster. It's not just the ships. Ships can be built. Japan's shipyards are already working on new carriers Taiho, Shokaku-class ships, conversions of other hulls. The steel can be replaced. But the men flying the aircraft off those decks? That's a different calculation entirely. Commander Minoru Genda, one of Japan's finest aviation strategists and a planner of the Pearl Harbor attack, examines the casualty lists from his hospital bed. He's recovering from pneumonia, having missed the Midway operation due to illness. As he reads the names, his face grows pale. He knows these men. He trained with them. He flew with them. We've lost irreplaceable assets, he tells his aide. The carriers are iron and steel. These men were the product of a decade of training. Japan's carrier pilot training program was rigorous, selective, and slow. Before the war, the Imperial Japanese Navy graduated perhaps 100 carrier-qualified pilots per year. The training took 3 to 5 years. Basic flight training, then specialized carrier training, then advanced tactical training, then integration with carrier air groups. A pilot didn't just learn to fly, he learned to navigate over open ocean, to attack ships at sea, to land on a pitching carrier deck in rough seas. The men who died at Midway had begun their training in 1936 or 1937. They were the product of peacetime training, intensive and thorough. They were, by any measure, among the finest naval aviators in the world. And now they're gone. Gender understands what Spruance understood. Japan can't replace them in time to matter. The Naval General Staff immediately expands the training programs, rushing new pilots through abbreviated courses. But abbreviated training produces abbreviated results. The new pilots lack the skill, the experience, the judgment of the men lost at Midway. In the United States, the opposite is happening. American training programs are ramping up to mass production scale. Naval Air Station Pensacola is graduating 500 pilots per month. More training bases are opening Jacksonville, Corpus Christi, Oakland. American industry is producing aircraft faster than pilots can be trained to fly them. And American training, while accelerated, maintains high standards. New pilots get 300 hours of flight time before they're carrier qualified. But there's another factor that Spruance understood, one that doesn't appear in casualty lists or training statistics: the psychological impact. Admiral Yamamoto, aboard his flagship Yamato, receives the full battle reports on June 6. He reads them in silence, his face expressionless. His staff officers wait nervously. Yamamoto had warned the Japanese government before Pearl Harbor that he could run wild for 6 months. But after that, he couldn't guarantee victory. The Battle of Midway occurred almost exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor. His 6 months are up. The initiative has passed to the Americans, Yamamoto tells his chief of staff. We will defend what we have taken, but we can no longer dictate the pace of operations. It's a stunning admission from the architect of Pearl Harbor, the man who had dominated Pacific naval strategy for 6 months. But Yamamoto is a realist. He understands naval mathematics. He knows that America is building carriers faster than Japan can sink them. He knows that American pilots are being trained in numbers that Japan can't match. And now, with 4 fleet carriers lost, Japan has lost its margin of superiority. Before Midway, Japan had 6 fleet carriers to America's 3. After Midway, Japan has 2 to America's 2 and America has more carriers under construction. The numbers will only get worse for Japan. But the strategic implications go beyond simple arithmetic. The loss at Midway forces Japan into a defensive posture. The planned operations against Fiji and Samoa designed to cut the supply lines between America and Australia are cancelled. The offensive into the Indian Ocean is indefinitely postponed. Instead, Japanese forces dig in to defend what they've already conquered. In Washington, Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, receives the Midway battle reports with grim satisfaction. He's been planning an offensive in the Solomon Islands, aimed at capturing Guadalcanal and its partially completed airfield. Before Midway, such an operation would have been suicide. Japanese carrier forces could have crushed any American landing. After Midway, the strategic calculus has changed. On August 7, 1942, just 2 months after Midway, U.S. Marines land on Guadalcanal. The Japanese Navy responds, but without carrier air cover. The battles around Guadalcanal become slugging matches between surface forces, not the carrier duels that characterized the early war. Japan can't risk its remaining carriers in the confined waters around the Solomons. By November 1942, Japan has lost 2 more carriers, Ryujo at Eastern Solomons and Shoho at Coral Sea, actually before Midway, but the loss compounds. The carrier Shokaku is damaged repeatedly and spends more time in repair yards than at sea. Zuikaku remains operational, but her air group has been shredded in the Guadalcanal campaign, her veteran pilots replaced by poorly trained newcomers. The new carriers Japan is building Taiho, Unryu, Amaja will join the fleet in 1944, but they'll be manned by pilots with 100 hours of flight time, facing American pilots with 300 hours. The quality gap, always Japan's secret weapon, has reversed. Aboard Enterprise, now heading back to Pearl Harbor for repairs and replenishment, Admiral Spruance writes his after-action report. His prose is characteristically understated, but one paragraph reveals his strategic thinking. The defeat inflicted upon the enemy carrier force represents more than a tactical victory. The elimination of 4 fleet carriers and their trained air groups has removed Japan's offensive capability in the Pacific theater. While the enemy retains significant surface forces and will continue to contest our operations, they no longer possess the means to project power across the strategic distances that characterize Pacific warfare. The initiative has passed to the United States. Spruance doesn't claim credit for the victory. He praises McClusky's decision to continue the search, best split-second judgment to attack a separate carrier, the courage of the torpedo squadrons whose sacrifice drew Japanese fighters down to sea level, leaving the dive bombers unmolested. He notes that luck played a role, arriving at exactly the moment when Japanese carriers were most vulnerable, catching them with armed and fueled aircraft on deck. But luck favors preparation. The American carriers were at Midway because naval intelligence had broken Japanese codes and predicted the attack. The American pilots found the Japanese carriers because McClusky made the right decision at the critical moment. The American bombs hit because the pilots were well trained and brave. And now, in the aftermath, Spruance understands the magnitude of what they've accomplished. The battle that historians will call the turning point of the Pacific War is over. 4 Japanese carriers rest on the ocean floor. With them went Japan's hopes of victory. The war will continue for 3 more years. There will be more battles, more casualties, more carriers sunk on both sides. But the strategic trajectory is set. Japan will fight defensively, losing ground, losing ships, losing men. America will advance, island by island, pushing toward the Japanese home islands. It all traces back to 6 minutes on June 4, 1942, when American dive bombers caught 3 Japanese carriers with their decks full of armed and fueled aircraft. 6 minutes that destroyed Japan's offensive capability. 6 minutes that changed the Pacific War. Admiral Spruance saw it immediately, standing on Enterprise's flag bridge, hearing the report that 3 carriers were burning. He understood that Japan couldn't replace those trained air groups in time to matter. He understood that the war had turned. History would prove him right. On June 7, 1942, Yorktown still afloat, still refusing to die, is torpedoed by Japanese submarine I-168. She finally sinks the next morning, taking 141 men with her. Her loss is tragic, but strategically irrelevant. America has already laid down keels for Essex-class carriers that will join the fleet in 1943. 24 of them will be built before war's end. Japan begins the war with 10 carriers. Japan ends the war with none. The seeds of that defeat were sown in 6 minutes above the Pacific Ocean on June 4, 1942, when Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky, Lieutenant Dick Best, and Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie led their squadrons down from 20,000 feet and placed their bombs with deadly precision on 3 Japanese carriers. Admiral Spruance understood what those 6 minutes meant. Standing on Enterprise's flag bridge, watching the sun set on the greatest carrier battle in history, he knew the Pacific War had turned. The burning carriers proved him right.